Okay, welcome again. This webinar is brought to you by the Ohio Employee Ownership Center. We are a nonprofit training and outreach organization for employee ownership at Kent State University. Today we have Cathy Ivancic of Workplace Development. Our session today is titled Avoiding the 7 Deadly Sins in Setting Up an ESOP Communication Committee. Cathy, take it away.
Okay. Well, good morning. It's so great to be with all of you today. This session, called the 7 Deadly Sins of ESOP Communications, really came to my business partner, Jim Beto, and I a couple of years ago when we realized that there are things that committees do that they don't recognize are really could be avoided or are really part of the normal development process in a communications committee. And so that's what we're going to go through today. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you may know Jim Beto, and I think some of you online may have also had me do some work at your company. We are with a firm called Workplace Development Incorporated. We work all over the country. The work that we do is to specialize in really 2 areas. One is to help people get the information to employees about what the ESOP is all about. And so in that, it's really a technical kind of a benefit plan side of ESOPs. But we've been doing this work I've been doing it since 1986, and the kind of work that we do is not just to explain what the ESOP is, but also in the second area is help people to connect what they do every day to performance. Because as you know, the studies show that ESOP companies where there's a connection, where people understand how they can impact value, those are the companies that are likely to outperform others in their industry. And so I want to give you kind of a flavor for where I'm coming from. I thought I would start off with this slide, which shows the gulf for ESOP communication and where it falls in most companies. There's a dilemma in ESOPs as compared to any other kind of benefit plan because of the fact that it involves finance, it involves human resources, and sometimes it kind of falls into the hole. You can see this hole in the middle between those 2 people. Now, sometimes that's the same person in a smaller company, and sometimes that's 2 different people. But there is nobody in the company who has this as a clear assignment. There may be many people who think that it's important and they think it's really part of becoming a great ESOP company, but it doesn't logically fall under anybody's area of responsibility. So sometimes what we see is that there are executive leaders or maybe leaders in operations who take it on. Sometimes it is a team of managers. Sometimes it is an ESOP committee, and we'll talk in a minute about the different kinds of committees that exist. And sometimes it is a mid-level leadership group or an employee team that doesn't have the name ESOP committee. At any rate, I think what's essential to realize is that there are a lot of people who have an interest in good ESOP communication in an organization, but it's got to fall someplace, and whoever takes on that responsibility, assuming it's an ESOP committee because of this session, really needs to recognize that it is owned by a lot of people throughout the organization. So I just wanted to kind of set it up with that and then talk about committees in general. I know some of you already know this, but we will go through it. There are many kinds of ESOP committees out there. And I think one of the deadly sins, which we didn't even add to the list, is the fact that not knowing what kind of committee you are is a dilemma. Some committees are administrative or fiduciary, and they're defined in the plan. You may have another committee that's not a communication committee, that is the ESOP committee, and they are responsible for things like approving the paperwork if there's a divorce involved with an ESOP account, and those sorts of administrative duties. The challenging thing is that some committees are that, and they're also a communication committee because they saw a need. They understood there was that gulf there. And sometimes they are also the people who go out and do the education. And I think the difference between communication and education is a subtle one, but you should note that there are many kinds of ESOP communication committees. There could be an ESOP communication committee who says, our job is to to do two-way communication with people. Or there may be an ESOP Communications Committee that says our job is to strengthen our culture and the connections between people. Education is really our job is to make sure that people learn the new things they need about the ESOP, and then sometimes it's the ESOP and the business. So I just wanted to kind of set that perspective because I know people on the phone are going to be coming from it from many different approaches. And I also wanted to set the stage and say that, you know what, even though when you go to these conferences and you go to things, you realize that a lot of these healthy companies have an ESOP committee, and maybe we need to have an ESOP committee, but I really want to emphasize that a committee is not what's making those companies successful. They have integrated that committee into their strategy. So there are other approaches that work for ESOP communication. I work with some executive planning teams where ESOP communication is on their docket. That's part of what they do. There are other companies where their plan is, instead of having a committee of diverse employees, they're going to engage their mid-level managers in communication. So what we're going to concentrate on today is that middle one, which is an employee committee, and just recognize that there's some companies that don't have ESOP communication committees, and they are very healthy and active and high participation companies. They just have a different strategy. So let's get into the committees. What are some of the benefits of having a committee? Well, if you have an employee committee, you got a group of people who can understand the concerns of employees. One thing about an ESOP is it can be really confusing. It has this complexity to it, and at the same time, it's unlike any other benefit plan because it's connected to our ownership and our future. And so employee teams, as opposed to just having this fall into the hands of just human resources, have these strengths. They can speak the language of employees. They're more creative and innovative. They can identify and dispel rumors quickly. One of the challenges, I think, is the people who deal with the ESOP on a day in and day out basis don't realize that some of the things about the ESOP are illogical and counterintuitive. And so they're thinking, well, why didn't you know that? Well, you knew that if you were the person who was administering it, but an employee team can really flag it. Say, for example, I'm working with a company right now where there's a requirement that a letter go out for diversification, and you have to send it out before people actually know how many shares they have for that year and what the value is. It's a silly IRS rule. Well, employees out there thought that this was something that the company was doing to frustrate people. And so when the committee brought this up and says, look, people are frustrated by this, why are you sending this silly letter out? They could get a dialogue going to help the leadership understand, oh, they didn't understand we had to send that letter. So you can see having an ESOP committee has some real benefits. I wanted to say that before we got into there's some things that committees can do, mistakes, or we put in sins. So we'll say sins of omission and commission, things that you do and things that you don't do that can really lead to disaster, and bring the demise of the committee. So these are the 7 I'm going to go through. Unrealistic expectations, enthusiasm, overruling planning, no clear goals, lack of support, losing credibility, disconnected from the business, and lack of knowledge. I'm sure there are more, but we decided we'd go with 7. Okay, so let's start with the first one, unrealistic expectations. One of the dilemmas of an employee stock ownership plan is because it does connect a benefit plan with ownership. And in the world in the United States, we value ownership very highly. It's pretty important to us. It's really part of our national character. But the thing is, we don't really have a clear one definition of what ownership is. And so when an ESOP committee, a communications committee, is put together, there is this confusion often about, okay, so what do we mean by owner? And this is, sometimes it comes straight to the committee members from people that they talk to. Am I really an owner? I'm not really an owner. I'm a shareholder. And then there's the other side of it. If I'm an owner, what's expected of me? And what should I expect of the company because it's an ESOP company? If nobody says anything on this issue, people will fill it in with their own information, and they'll fill it in with what somebody says or what they think should be. If you think about it, owning stock in Apple right now, if I'm a shareholder and I own stock in a public company, I really am a passive owner. I can't do anything every day to enhance Apple's performance. But in employee ownership, I can do something every day. And the same thing is true that ownership by an individual in an individual company. If I am the 100% owner of a company, I really take on a management role and an ownership role and a leadership role, and sometimes a role in a family-owned business. So all those get all mixed up, and people say, what kind of ownership is this? That makes it especially difficult for the committee if that isn't clear. And the committee has to answer that last one, which is what role do we play in helping the company succeed? But they also need to have some sense of those first three bullets. So I think we're going to open the lines up here for a minute.
The conference has been unmuted.
I'm wondering, are there some of you out there who might have run into this challenge out there, and what does it sound like? Do you hear people kind of having confusion about ownership out there? Or you have any comments or questions on this?
Cathy, what you have just reviewed in the last 3 minutes kind of struck a nerve with me in positioning the committee in its role of helping to develop an ownership mentality or an ownership culture.
Yeah.
That's that's what the committee is all about. At some point, the company recognizes that, hey, we need to think and act like owners around here, and maybe we better have a communication committee because we all know the communication is so important. Okay.
Yeah.
But you brought up a very important point. One of the first steps that I believe is important in building that culture is identifying what an owner is in your company.
Yes, and it's different in every company. I think that's the point here. And one of the things we do in our consulting with companies and with committees is, if this isn't well defined, let's start putting some words on it and throw it out there and get people to respond. The folks at EBO Group went through a process where they listed off all of their corporate values, and together they defined who we are. Now, other companies, the way they go at it is just let's work on this together, get some words together, and send it out there and just see what kinds of reactions that we get. So that's something that a committee can do, but I think committees fall apart when they're given the job of go out there and change our culture, go out there and make us better, and they don't really have any clarity from their leadership about what kind of ownership is this. And in one ESOP company, it might be that this is the best retirement plan you could ever get in our industry, and this is a tremendous level of benefit, and it's growing, and it's an opportunity no one has. That could be the way they look at ownership. Somebody else might look at ownership and say, this is the way that we get shared rewards for meeting our performance goals. And those two are really different, right?
Right.
So I think that's something that if a committee doesn't have that, they can get help in getting that clarity by saying back to their leadership, hey, could you help us out here? And that's something we help committees do, is to get a dialogue going there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go to the next the next sin, but we can come back to this if those of you online want to participate and share stories about it. Because I think this is like the guts of when people put an ESOP in. They're usually all worried about, oh, how's the money going to work and how's the benefit going to work, and they forget that it also hits our gut. And if we don't have a gut answer, then we're challenged. And I think part of the way people have this, learn this, is not to be told it, but through experience. We have this little exercise called roles and responsibilities that really gets people to say what they think ownership is and then logically come to the conclusion, oh, it's not that, it's this in our company. And that's a good thing because that's going to help us succeed. And people need to come to that conclusion. You can't really you can't really lecture on that. It has to be an experience. Okay, so, how come I'm not moving forward there? Okay, the next of the 7 deadly sins is enthusiasm overrules planning. Now these girls are having a party, but it reminds me of some committees that I've worked with. I worked with this committee in Texas, and they spent, I would say 6 months putting together a plan for everyone to go to Six Flags. And they had, we're all going to invite our families, and we're going to have color-coded wristbands from the different departments, and we're going to have games that go along with it. What happened to them was they didn't have any, they had lots of enthusiasm for going to Six Flags, but they didn't have any sense of what this was going to cost or how they were accomplishing their goals. But they were running on that enthusiasm and that emotional energy for the project. So they just kept on rolling on it and rolling on it. One of the things that we help companies do is to slow people down on that and channel it. That's one of the challenges, is that when you get an idea, it seems like a great idea. We're going to bring all the families together, we're going to have a party. You need to say, okay, now why are we doing that? So I'm going to go to my next slide, which is the development process that we help companies go through. And some of you are on committees that have gone around this circle several times. If you start off in the beginning and you're going to get organized, it's who's on the committee, how long are they staying, all those questions about structure. And then the next step, which is the one that people often miss, is then you define your mission and your goals. And what are we all about? What's our purpose here? And not just what's our big purpose, but get down to objectives that are, at the end of the year, we'll know we've succeeded when we do this. That's why we really focus on, if you know what your purpose is, then you'll know what have we got to teach ourselves, what do we need to know or not know, and then you can move to action planning. But you know how it normally works out. People don't do the 5-step process, they do the 2-step process. It's probably a much easier dance. You get yourself organized, then you go do something. And then they turn around and they say, okay, we did a project, now we need another project and another project. If they get into that series of endless projects, they're riding on enthusiasm, which is great, because you're getting that enthusiasm going, but they've lost their purpose. And they have, so when the enthusiasm wears off, which it's going to, that's the way we humans are, then people don't know where to go, and the committee generally has trouble at that point. So this process, you go all the way around to step 5, and then you really need to come back and talk about, are we organized in the way that we need to be to accomplish our goals? It really is it's a structure that allows people to take more responsibility, and it also makes some of the activities more meaningful for people. I'll get into that in a minute. Clearly, if you don't have any mission or any goals, you don't know where you're going, anything you do seems like the right thing to do. Not evaluating is often the largest downfall. But the only way you can evaluate is if you had a plan. So that's why we encourage people to have a plan in place that is written down. And it may not be what you follow, but having it really is powerful, and having worked through it as a group. And that's one of the things that we do with committees. We help them not just write that plan. It's not about writing the plan. It's not about having the plan. You can't steal a plan from someone else. It's that process of saying, okay, what are we going to accomplish, and why are we going to accomplish that? Why are we going to work towards that? So that when you're in the middle of planning that party or in the middle of planning that communication, you can say to yourself and everybody else who's helping you, because it helps you delegate, you can say, hey, what exactly are we getting done here? And you can remind yourself, oh yeah, for example, I have this client that has a tradition of bowling one time a month that is hosted by the ESOP Committee. And for many years this went on, and it was great fun, and people were very active in it, and it kind of fell off. And it fell off, and then when I started working with the committee, I said, now what was the purpose of the bowling? And some of them said, well, I don't know, there is no purpose. And finally, a couple of them, including their HR manager who was sitting in, she says, that bowling and those social aspects are the only way our people in the field can connect with each other socially. If we can have those kinds of social connections, we can solve problems better, and we can turn the corner as a company and be able to do the things we need to do. We know that is part of us being a success. Once they knew that, people were back on doing bowling. It was like, yeah, we're doing bowling, but we're not doing bowling because it's bowling. We're doing bowling because we're community building. Community building is part of what makes us a successful company. That's the difference. So you taking a plan from somebody else and just saying, oh, yeah, we'll just implement a plan, that's not it. It's that conversation that people have. And these people happen to be in Hawaii, and they are on different islands. And so they never see each other in the day-to-day work. They're all on site in different places. When they get together, that's part of creating a company for them. Now, in another company, that might not be the important thing. They might be sustaining their culture and promoting what makes them unique with the next generation of people who are going to be working in that company and really building that. So putting words on it really matters. So having a blueprint or a plan is very helpful. It's really the process you go through in building that that's really powerful. Okay, now why is it not clicking? All right. So I wanted to give you an example of everybody does statement presentations, or this is something many ESOP companies do. When the statements come out one time a year, you're talking about an opportunity here. There's an itch, right? People get that statement and they're kind of interested in it. What you do with that itch is up to you. It depends on what are you trying to accomplish. Is this our chance to get people to hook in and give them a refresher on the plan basics? For some companies, that's the right way to go. For others, it's not the right way to go because they've got a group of people who tune out and are not interested in that, so they need to put that someplace else. For some companies, it's a chance for them to highlight business results. We always talk about getting people to focus in on their favorite radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me. That's going to be important in getting their attention, but after that, you want to make sure that your focus is what are the messages we want to be sending as a committee. So sometimes people do this in-house. Sometimes they use outsiders. Sometimes there's combo. Sometimes they do it with paper. Sometimes they do it with webinars, electronically, lots of ways to do it. But how you do it depends on your goals too. So you may walk through the statement, have everybody attend, or you may make it voluntary depending on what your goals are. But once you've decided what your goals are, there's a lot of different ways to put a statement presentation together. It can be in Spanish. I guess we got one in Spanish. Or maybe what you want to do is give people something that they can go back to later and figure out their statement because they're not really paying attention during that. So here's an example of a client that we worked with where they wanted a book, which was the handbook, so that leaders could go back to that with people, because they knew nobody ever paid attention during the presentation. So another opportunity, the SPD, it's up to all of you to decide if that summary plan description, which is about 20 pages, is really communication. It's an important document. You got to give it to people. It's very much misunderstood and full of terms that are hard to understand. Maybe there's a way to use those required communications as a way to reach your goals. And again, you got to do it. There are things you have to do. Can you do it in ways that you can achieve your goals? Once you've kind of got a picture of who are we as a committee, what are we accomplishing as a company, how are we contributing to company success, then you can start doing sorting. What is it? What do people need to know? What do they ought to know? You know, there's too much information in the ESOP world if you think about it. What would it be nice for them to know, and what is a waste of time for us to, that's outside the box here. If you can focus only on need-to-know information in the beginning, that's an easy way to help a committee focus. And then once you figure out what your need-to-know things are, then you need to realize that saying it once is not enough. You need written, you need meetings, you need lots of different ways of reaching people with the same message over and over and over again, because we're adults and we have a very active life and we've got a lot of other things to think about. So here's just some examples of, once a committee has decided, hey, here's what we're all about, only one way of sending that message is not as effective as many different ways. I think I was going to stop. Let's go on, and then I'll stop. I got a lot more to say on the next one.
Well, we might just ask if there are any questions, because we are.
Are there any? Are we still unmuted?
Yes, we are.
Oh, good. Oh, you guys are quiet. Any questions or comments or examples of ways that you get your message out? You guys are being very quiet. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one, but I think I have something that will get your participation. I'm going to put two of these sins of committees together. One being one of the sins, and I don't think you could call it a sin. It's more of not seeking the support of the leadership of the company, but a lack of support by the corporate leadership is a reason for the committee to put themselves basically out of business and decide we can't really be helpful. We should not exist unless we have a connection to the success of the business. After all, and I think that this comes somehow from going to this message that people get at conferences, you got to have a committee, you got to have a committee. No, I worked with a company, they had a committee for years. They had trouble getting people to meetings. They had difficulty making it work. They knew that they wanted to have a newsletter. They disbanded the committee and they created a newsletter that people contribute to through HR. And it's a better success because the committee was burdensome and they didn't have a real connection other than the fact that they ran this newsletter. So I think it's important to note that if nobody in the corporate leadership can see how this committee is helping and it's disconnected from the business, maybe it's better that the committee not try because it's really you're not going to be successful. When companies put in an ESOP, they usually think, yeah, I'm going to be connected to this committee that we're creating to do communication. But often it's not part of the structure to have a corporate sponsor or a mentor or a guide, or sometimes I call them a helper. I have one client where the person who is their corporate mentor doesn't go to all of their meetings but goes to some of their meetings. I have other people I work with where the corporate sponsor, the person who is in a leadership position, goes to all of the meetings. Sometimes I think people put a committee in place and they think, well, we don't want to get in their business, so I won't go to their meetings. Well, what that does is that leaves people with this huge gap of, what are we supposed to be doing that's helping the business? And that's really frustrating. So they invent something, they try it, and they find out, oh no, that wasn't it. And that's not as effective as having somebody who is the regular communicator with the committee. They don't have to go to all the meetings, but they have to be giving the committee the advice they need on budget and direction. And I think that's, for example, that client where the people were jumping off and trying to go to Six Flags. Well, if their corporate sponsor had been there in the early meetings, they could have reined that in with a discussion about budget and then gotten on a healthier track. It really helps if the committee has a link to corporate goals and has either a budget or has gone through the planning process and has asked for, said, here's what we think it's going to cost, and then gotten a conversation going about that. In the work that we do with committees, half of the work is with the leadership group and trying to figure out what do you want that committee to be accomplishing for the company. When people know that they are doing something that is helping the company, it's easier for them to enlist others to help, and it's easier for them to implement the tasks at hand and keep going when sometimes they're going on volunteer time. Okay, now the next deadly sin is losing credibility. So maybe you could give me some ideas of things that people say about committees that have lost credibility. Anybody want to comment? I have my own list, but what do they say? What kinds of things do you hear when a committee has lost its credibility completely? None of your committees, of course. Oh, you're not going to give, here's one, okay, I got one for you, and maybe you can chime in on this. I hear people say, oh, they're not really an important committee, they're just party planners. I've heard that one. And it's really offensive to the committee because they thought that that party planning was something that people appreciated. Or another way they lose credibility is, oh, that's not a real committee, they got no power. You may hear people say something along those lines. Or another way of losing credibility is, oh, they're a do-nothing committee. That's just full of a bunch of ESOP zealots. You know, they're all ESOP happy over there, and they've disconnected themselves from the rest of the workforce. So what do? Each one of those you can see is just a little bit different. So how to go at it, the way that you have lost credibility, that's the place to start. And I think that's, for some committees, that's kind of a painful process to go, man, how come we're not, people don't see us as something valuable, or we don't feel like we're something that's valuable. Well, each one, we've already gone through some of the things that can help here, where the party planners, well, having more clarity in the purpose for those parties or for those activities, or maybe you will find that the parties don't fit and that those aren't part of where you want to be going. Having no real power, I think that one is an underpinning, the underlying message there is people don't really understand what your purpose was or what they should be expecting out of ownership. They hear ESOP committee and they think all their ideas about ownership gets poured into that. Maybe they're thinking, well, owners get to make decisions about the corporation, or owners get to do this, or whatever they have in their head about ownership is coming out. They don't know what the committee is doing, and the committee hasn't done a very good job of communicating what their role is and what their expectations are about ownership. The Do-Nothing Committee, I think that what often happens is that those are committees that are taking it all on their own, and if you have a plan in place, it's easier to delegate. The ESOP zealots, I strongly urge people on committees who sense that they're getting some of that out there to figure out a way to include the skeptics in their planning or on their committee because one of the benefits of having people on a committee is that you get a group of people who have to learn, this is a little harder than I thought, or this is there's a lot more to this than I thought. So those are some strategies for dealing. You can see that credibility can be lost in a lot of different ways.
Cathy, this is Jay. This last point is interesting. You included the word skeptics. Virtually every initiative that a company embarks upon has skeptics, okay? And especially an ESOP company where you've got some engaged employees, they have opinions on everything. For those of you on the call that have a committee in some stage of development, what are the common criticisms that you get from the skeptics about the committee itself? Can anybody offer anything? How are you as a committee member being criticized for what you're trying to do?
Oh, come on. They're just so quiet.
Okay.
Well, I think one thing that it is worth thinking about, we know, those of you who are being quiet on this call, that you have some of those people. But if you think about how many people are saying negative things, sometimes the people who have the most enthusiasm are offended by anybody having something critical to think about what they're doing. But you should expect that 5 to 10% of the people are not going to like what you're doing, or could have negative sentiments about the ESOP or about anything. Just 5 to 10% of the people, if they left the company, 5 to 10% of the people would play that role. That's just the way it is. But if you have that 5 to 10% and they're the people who are being listened to, that's where a committee can become the voice of real information about the ESOP. And I think that's one of the problems, is that rumors get going and those people who want to talk fill in the gap if the committee can't fill in the gap. Because as you saw in the beginning, it's in that gulf in the middle between. It's no one's real responsibility. It gets lost sometimes. Okay, lack of knowledge is one of the things that happens to a lot of committees. One of the dilemmas is that an employee stock ownership plan is complex, and it also goes across different disciplines. It goes across, it's a benefit plan, and it has to do with corporate finance, and it also has to do with how you lead people. There are really two strategies, I think, for the fact that there is too much information. The first, and both of them acknowledge as a committee that you should let yourself off the hook for not knowing all of it, and know what you don't know. That's your only job on the committee, is to learn enough to realize I'm not going to try to answer those questions. In fact, there's a lot of questions that people should not try to answer. For example, distribution rules. That's a common one that people start walking down that path and realize, you know what, I need to know a lot more about your personal situation, and then I may not want to be giving you advice. So what we like to say is educate yourself enough so you know what you don't know. And you know when people are asking a question, you can interpret what they're asking the question about. In some committees, their role is not to answer any questions, but just to find the right person to answer that question for someone in the company. And I think that's a really important role for people to play. The second way to look at it is, since it's so complicated, and since there are many, there's lots of facts that people can ask, and you don't want to get those facts wrong. What a lot of committees like to do is create a tool or a process so that you don't have to become the expert, but there's some place that you send people, or a thing that people do that has that information accurately. This really frees the committee up from having to become expert. And these kinds of committees can have more people cycle through the committee because they're using a tool that has that, so they don't have to spend a year learning about it. They can actually use a tool that's, here's all about the ESOP. I don't know all of it, but I can take you through and make sure that you understand it. And I'll talk about both of these. Let's first talk about the educate yourself on what you know and what you don't know. One thing that we have learned is that learning the complexity of business is something people have to experience. So they're either going to experience in what I call on-the-job learning, or one way that we've helped committees accelerate their learning is by going through a business simulation. And the business simulation that we use is one that Jim Beto and I invented many years ago called the ESOP game. When people go through a business simulation where they're running an imaginary ESOP company, they can see both the complexity of administering the plan and also the complexity of running the business, and learn what are the forces that are going on, so that they can understand better what's actually growing value and what kinds of pressures are on the business. We find that something like a simulation helps people to learn faster. So this is something that a committee or sometimes leaders, it can help them accelerate their learning about the ESOP and the business fast. And then you relate the game to the experience with your company and your goals. It's one way, by the end of it, people say, you know, I know that after playing this, I know that it's a whole lot more complicated than I thought. And you know what you don't know, where you want to get answers to questions. Now, on the other way of accelerating knowledge is to say, I'm not going to learn this stuff and be the person who answers your questions. We're going to create either a document or a learning curriculum that we're all going to use. And several of our companies are using something they call a Certified Employee Owner Program, which it has all the content that everybody should know, but instead of having to be worried about that being delivered to different people, they created, for some people it's a book where the people in the committee take people through the content in the book, and then they take a quiz, and if they pass the quiz, they get in a drawing for a prize, and they get certain privileges and a button and all kinds of recognition as being a certified employee owner. Or another client of ours has it online, and the way they do it is because their people are all over the place. They have online education that the committee members encourage people to go through, and they collect their questions that going through the session stimulated, but people answer the questions and answer the quiz online, and they automatically get themselves into the drawing for the people who become a certified employee owner, and then they get in the drawing to win the prize. If you have something out there that has these are the facts, and it's not written like a summary plan description, and it's something that everyone goes through, then you can be confident that people are not guessing at the answers to questions, and you can also cycle more people through your committee. So the role they are playing is really just bringing people to the content. They don't have to know the content. And I think that's something that some people forget, is that we don't have to know it all. We just have to know what we don't know and then bring people to the content that is important, depending on what cycle they're in. Is it new people? Is it people who have been with the ESOP for a while? Is it people who are nearing retirement? Those different categories have different needs. So these are the failures of ESOP committees, but clearly having a committee and avoiding some of these as you're moving through can be a really powerful thing for ESOP companies if it's done right. And so I don't know if my little devil guy's going to, he's not on this one. If we eliminate these kinds of things, a committee can be contributing to company success.
Questions out there? Cathy, I think I would loop back to, in your list of 7 sins, especially the lack of support and the disconnect from the business, and I think those are closely tied. And I think that makes a point that is kind of near and dear to my heart. I believe that identifying a role for the committee as just part of culture development is very critical. I mean, you can have a great bunch of people that are the best party planners in the world, and they do a great job of that, But if they don't have the support from the top leadership in the company that has decided that ownership culture is very, very important to the company and a top priority, and then the committee is part of that strategy to get to the culture, then you're not going to have the kind of committee that you want.
And I think that part of the challenge is that leaders are wandering around in their own head about, now what kind of an ownership culture do we want? And so as they're trying to figure that out, they put a committee in and they're not really clear in the beginning, but you can grow together. The committee can grow with the leadership in trying to figure out, now here's what people are saying out there. Is that what you think it is? And then they can say, yeah, I think that's what it is, or no, I don't think that's what it is, because that's not helping us grow as a company.
Great. Yeah.
And I think that the idea that, we got to have it all figured out before we put a committee in. No, I think that's a useless way of going at it. But to recognize that it is unformed and we are going to create a dialogue where that's formed is, I think, very, very helpful for committees. And to be patient with yourself. We don't have to be perfect. We are starting a dialogue about a really important area that no one else has got a responsibility for, and so let's make sure someone pays attention to that.
Right. You use the word dialogue, which insinuates that a role for the committee is to get information as well as send information. So the committee becomes the ears for top management and strategy creation and culture development.
And for some committees, that is their role. That's their number one role. And the committees where that's one of their roles, they thrive when there is somebody in executive leadership who wants that kind of conversation.
Right.
And I discourage anybody from making that one of their key goals if there isn't anybody who really leads in that way or wants to lead in that way. That doesn't mean you can't have a committee. It just means you can't have two-way communication as one of your number one goals. And for some committees, that is their number one goal. They see a gap and they say, we're going to be two-way communication, but you can't be two-way communication if you don't have the other way. So, choose another goal that might be helpful to the company until you can find somebody who wants that to be a mechanism for them. Maybe They never thought of it that way. They thought, you're a committee, you're going to go, they've heard somebody at a conference say, hey, you're going to go plan parties, and people get together and they go, you know what, the real problem is people don't get it and they don't feel engaged. And so you come back and you give them the bad information, people don't really get engaged, or don't feel engaged. You're giving them information. Now you need to find a task that's going to help all of you together move forward as a company. And different companies are in different places, so there's no one recipe here.
Right.
Some companies, the ESOP doesn't have anything to do with that dialogue for some companies. It's a really good benefit. We got to get the word out about that really good benefit. In other companies, it's more connected to their who they are as a company, and it needs more clarity and definition there.
Right. I would be curious from our listeners whether that point kind of resonates with any of you. This issue of being connected with management's intent to create a better culture. Has that been a problem for any of you, or is it are you do you recognize that you do have that support and that's an advantage? Any input there from you guys?
Well, this is Dava. We don't have a committee as of yet, and we're just tossing it around. We have been for a couple of years, and I think we're kind of disconnected with our ownership culture because we have a lot of employees that work in the field, and we do give them the ESOP information at new hire orientation, and I think they lose sight of it, and their only time they're concerned is when our certificates come out or when they're terminating. And I've been tossing this back and forth with Cathy. I don't know if we need an ESOP committee or an education committee or no committee, maybe a newsletter, like Cathy was talking about another company.
Yeah, and that choice has to do with, at the end, where do we want them to be?
Right.
And so a committee may or may not be the thing that moves you in the direction you want to go. And I think that's a really essential point. You know, there are some committees that are extremely successful, and then there are other committees that are failures, but the committee or the company is a success. And so, you know, a committee is a tool. It's just one tool.
Right, and we have an intranet site that, you know, that solely is ESOP, and, you know, they can get all their, you know, the summary plan description and their certificates and information on there. But I don't think they use it.
Mm-hmm. So
I mean, I'm sure that they use it when, you know, we announce that our certificates are out. That's the biggest thing. They go out there and use it, update their beneficiary, but I think that's it.
Yeah, so it's the would we get as a company a benefit out of more excuses to go learn about the fact that we share ownership here.
Right.
And and for some companies there's a committee that does that, and there are benefits to having a committee. And then there are the downside is then you are maintaining a group of people who have to maintain a connection to each other and
right.
to their mission.
Right.
And in the multi-location companies do have a challenge with that, and it really helps if they have to have a really strong mission if you're multi-location.
And I think my biggest I would like to educate them more. And
because they know about it as a benefit only when they tune in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, well there's that other weird thing we have, and that's not the I'm part of a really special company that has this. Yeah, because there is something very unique about having an ESOP, and for most companies with an ESOP, it's a level of benefit that they're not getting anywhere else. And it's an opportunity to have what you do every day impact performance. So choosing what that message is really important. What do we want people to get about our ESOP, and then getting out there and making it happen. And a committee can be the impetus that makes it more real, because you get information from them about what's not working. You know, I had one CEO, every single year he would give a big long speech at the annual meeting, and he goes, I told him that at the annual meeting. Finally the committee had to tell him, you know what, you guys, no one was listening to you when you told them that. We got to tell them 20 times.
The company that you described that had the newsletter, was it an ESOP newsletter or just a general HR newsletter?
They decided that they wanted a business newsletter about performance, because that's the piece that really was helping them. They have different locations all over the country, and they had to take all these people who were in different locations who were running their own little kingdom, and they had to create one company out of it if they were going to grow. And so their goal for this newsletter, which they've done for years and years, and the goal still is to define what we are as a company together, business-wise, and to get good stories about collaboration out there. Okay. So we were real clear about I do the newsletter for them still today. So we're still really clear about just the message of the newsletter and how does it help the company succeed. That's what they decided they were going to settle on. And they have people who are employees who are not participants, so they kind of talk about ESOP, but it's always ESOP and job security together. Okay. So
I would definitely support that in a newsletter. I think a newsletter can morph into many things, and it should focus on business. It's a perfect opportunity to give recognition and tell success stories and give the employee workforce an idea of how the strategy is working out, and it can promote the ESOP, you know, within the stories. It can be a great vehicle, but if it turns into just a social newspaper, if you will, where you're talking about, you know, recent weddings and in those.
Or you're going, what can we get in the newsletter? We need something for the newsletter. Then you maybe have lost your strategy.
Okay.
Exactly.
Every newsletter has to have a strategy too, if you're going to be successful, because then you can. Sometimes the strategy is owned by the person who is in charge of the newsletter. But if you have it written down somewhere, then everybody can know, oh yeah, we got to, when they see an opportunity, like let's talk about how job level things impact performance. Oh, they see one of those, they say, got to get it in the newsletter. It's different than, gee, I wonder what we're going to put in the newsletter. Now, other companies just sometimes use that newsletter as their ESOP reminder thing. So it's all about ESOP.
Yeah.
And that's a different strategy, different newsletter.
Exactly right. Yeah. We're growing close to our closing time here, but I want to give everybody the opportunity for questions or input. Looking at the roster of companies that are on the call today, we've got some ESOP companies that have been around a long while. Okay, and I think that points to the fact that communication obviously never stops. And even in a mature ESOP, often we don't get the kind of communication that we're after. There's continual changes in a company, so good communication through a committee or whatever means you choose to do it is ongoing every day, every minute, and it really never stops.
Yeah, it really. I think people think, well, did you check the box we put in a committee? Oh no, now it just begins.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions out there? Any other communication from our communication committees? Okay.
They're so silent.
Yeah, well, let me close it off here if there are no other questions. And I just want to thank Cathy, Ivancic very, very much. For those of you that are on the call, you have a great resource in Cathy. And, take advantage of, right now, if you have any questions while she's still willing to talk with us, or make sure you contact Cathy at a later time, or contact me here at the OEOC so we can help you further and we can have more discussion about Communication Committee. I want to remind you that we are in the middle of our webinar series for the spring here at the OEOC. We have 2 more webinars coming up on April 5th. We will talk ESOP administration and focus on benefit distribution. Okay, this is a real critical administrative issue, and Pete Schuler of Crow Horwath will be our presenter. And then on April 10th, we're going to talk valuation, an issue near and dear to our hearts in an ESOP company. And we're going to try to demystify some of the confusion around valuation, and Scott Miller of Enterprise Services will be presenting that. Again, 2 outstanding presenters, so don't miss that. Tell your colleagues about those 2 sessions. And then in April, of course, we've got the 26th Annual Employee Ownership Conference put on by the OEOC. That'll be in Fair Lawn. Don't miss that. Check our website and register for that. Bring a group. You can get discounts. That's the 20th on a Friday. And on the day before, Thursday the 19th, we will be having some pre-conference activities, and one of them will be a communication forum. And those of you that are on the phone now, please consider coming to that and bring a group. We will have HR managers in ESOP companies that will be facilitating that session, and we'll have open forum on communications of all shapes and sizes in ESOP companies. Bob, are you on the call? Bob Chess at ACRT has agreed to help facilitate that session. I think Renee is on our call today.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
We're looking forward to the 19th and having a good session. And then on the 20th itself, Cathy will be doing a breakout session.
With a boatload of ideas, new ideas we didn't do today.
Great ideas, yes. Okay.
And I'm going to be joined by Mary Bing from Pranky Romick. So she's going to help me with some of those ideas from the committee.
Good. Okay, if there are no further questions, I'll just point out that you will receive an email feedback form. Please fill that out. Give us some suggestions for future sessions and what you thought about this one. So at this time, I will stop the meeting and end the webinar, and hope all of you have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.